Hello YouTube, this is Matt Pullen, and we're going to talk about a very well-known chess opening trap known as the Blackburne-Shilling Gambit. And this arises in the Italian game after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and then black plays the unusual knight to d4. And I would say this is one of the top 3 or 4 specific opening move sequences that beginners in chess should know about, when you're first venturing into tournament play, because this gets used quite a lot at low levels to try and trap an inexperienced white. Because there's a very poisonous trap involved in this knight d4 move, and pretty much everyone who plays and faces this trap for the very first time loses. And here's what would happen. Let's say white were to go ahead and take the pawn on e5, which is a very natural move. I mean, after this, the knight and the bishop, they both attack f7, which is, fundamentally the most vulnerable square on the chessboard in the opening. So, beginners are taught to, guard the f2, f7 squares, and, look for opportunities to attack their opponent on these squares. And, when I was first learning chess openings, most of my games with white were won, based on the combined attack with the minor pieces on f7. So this was, I think, the first time I saw this trap. It was in an over-the-board situation. I was in 8th grade at the time, and this is a tournament in Terre Haute, Indiana. And I played knight takes e5, which is the natural move, and my opponent then responded queen g5, and this is the idea behind the trap. So black has violated opening principle. He's moved his knight, twice in the opening, and he's developed his queen before moving his minor pieces out. But tactics oftentimes triumph over abstract principles in chess. And here, the very specific tactic is that black is attacking the knight on e5 and the pawn on g2. And should the black queen take the pawn on g2, white will have serious problems, because this knight on d4, which isn't apparently attacking anything, has influence over the e2 and f3 squares. So suppose white were to play knight takes f7 here, and this is supported by the bishop, and it forks the queen and rook. But this is actually a blunder because of queen takes g2, and black threatens to take the rook on h1 with check. And the only way that this can be prevented is to play rook f1. But now there's queen takes e4 with check, and because the knight covers the e2 square, white doesn't want to block with his queen on e2. So the only move left is to block with the bishop on e2. And now the problem is that there's smothered mate after knight f3. And many games have ended this way. So yeah, that is the trap in the Blackburne-Shilling, which legend has it the English master Joseph Blackburn won shillings from amateurs at the cafe numerous times with this checkmate. So that's how the Blackburne-Shilling Gambit got its name. Now, actually, I realized what would happen if I took on f7 here. So I tried to bail out, and I tried knight g4 in this position, with the idea just to block the attack of the black queen on g2. But my opponent played d5, and this is a winning move for black. It attacks the bishop on c4, and it also attacks the knight on g4. So, I mean, after normal play, white would just be going down a piece for nothing here. I forgot exactly what happened in this game. You know, it wasn't. It's not particularly important, but I remember I actually drew this game with the white pieces. But it is simply because my opponent was not very good. But anyway, that's how you refute knight g4. You just play d5, and black is winning the piece. So let's go back. I might come back later and discuss what happens on bishop takes f7. But we'll go back to that. So here, after black moves his knight to d4, is an indication there's something strange going on. So in this position, after I'd been hit by that trap for the first time, in subsequent games, when I faced this move, I played pawn to c3 instead. This is the most conservative way for white to play. After knight takes, knight check, queen takes, instantly threatening another beginner's attack, the scholar's mate. But then after knight f6, d4, d6, this is nothing special for white. So the strongest way of handling this is to exchange the knights, is to take on d4. And in order to understand, this structure that's arisen, and how white is supposed to play from here, I think it would be good to look at another opening. Let's look at the Ruy Lopez after bishop b5. This is also a real move, knight to d4. It actually has a direct threat now. Black is threatening the bishop on b5. So after knight takes and e takes, this bishop on b5 is no longer well placed, and it's going to be driven back with tempo after black plays pawn to c6. So that is part of the justification behind the the bird's variation against the Ruy Lopez. And another part of the justification is that the point of the Ruy Lopez opening is for white to play c3 and d4, and then develop the queenside pieces after castling. But because there's a black pawn on d4, this move can't happen. So it has sort of a constraining effect on white's queenside development. So black is going to try to play to emphasize this. So after castles, I'm just going to show the modern main line of the bird variation. I mean, there are other moves for both sides. If you want to find out more about the bird variation of the Ruy Lopez, Andy Soltis has written a pretty good book on it. It's kind of old, but you'll find all of the relevant main ideas for both sides. So after the bishop retreats to c4, bishop a4 is also a move. Bishop e2 is a move, but this is the main line. And then knight f6, counterattack on the e pawn. And if the c pawn goes to e5, then black plays d5, and this is perfectly fine for black. So it's better for white to defend the e pawn, and there are a few different ways to do this. like d3 is a move, queen f3 is a move, but those are minor lines. I'm going to talk about rook e1 and queen e2. So queen e2, this used to be very much in vogue because there's a line where it looks like black is going to be unable to castle and his king is going to be stuck in the middle of the board. So this threatens to to advance the pawn to e5, which in turn would threaten a discovered check. So black has to do something about this threat. So d6 is played here, and now white normally advances with the pawn, to break open the e-file. So black is pretty much forced to take this, and queen takes, and the queen is also on d4, so the bishop block is forced, and now rook e1. And this battery is very potent of white's major pieces on the e-file. So this bishop cannot be it's sufficiently protected right now, but black wants to castle, and he can't do that if his bishop is hanging. So in this position, it used to be thought that black was just worse here, and the main line was just to play like king f8, unpinning the bishop, and then later try to develop this rook with h5 and h4, something like this. But later on, it was discovered there's a resource for black that allows him to castle, and that's what sort of turned people off of the queen e2 line, and that is b5. This is a very good idea. It threatens the bishop, and if the bishop drops back, then black is able to develop with the bishop to e6, closing up the e-file. So therefore, white plays bishop b3, and now a5. Now white has to respect the threat of trapping the bishop. And there's another idea that black is aiming for, and that is with the a5 move, frees up a7, and the rook can protect the bishop laterally, and this will allow black to castle. And white is still, very much behind in development, and black is going to equalize by gaining tempo on the white queen and moving forces towards white's king side. So that's an important line to know about. Rook e1 is probably the best move in that position. It's more flexible than queen e2. So then after d6, white really doesn't gain anything by opening the position with e5. So white plays c3, because he wants to eliminate this black pawn on d4 so that he can get his queenside pieces into play. But black doesn't want to. He wants to hold the d4 square as long as he possibly can. So instead of doing something like takes, which would be very obliging, the main move is knight to g4. And again, black is violating principle. He's moving the same minor piece twice in the opening. But again, there's a specific tactical reason for this. The move rook e1 weakened the f2 square, and now the pawns on f2 and h2 are defended only by the white king. And if black is allowed to play queen to h4, attacking both of these pawns, white is going to be in a lot of trouble. So h3, to drive the knight away, and then knight e5. So this move attacks the bishop on c4. There are two ways that white can deal with this. The more complicated way is to play bishop f1, simply retreating the bishop, and now black plays d3. This move is very important because it it fixes these these queenside. The presence of the pawn on d3 prevents white from developing his queenside, basically. And even though this pawn on d3 is in danger in the long term, black has to play with energy and create some short-term problems for white to deal with, while the two halves of his army are disconnected. For instance, there's a very complicated line that runs f4, queen b6 check, king h2, h5. And this analysis was done years and years ago, and I'm not going to go into it in this video, but yeah, is a very messy position. So another way, aside from bishop f1, is to play pawn to d3, and this is the positional variation. And white simply is protecting his bishop and allowing black to gain the bishop pair by moving his knight for a fourth time. So if black doesn't take this bishop, then white will simply retreat the bishop and then take on d4 or something, or play pawn to f4, gaining space on the king side. So knight takes is essentially forced, and then d takes, and then this square is now falling, so black has no choice but to exchange. And then knight takes. Let's play some more moves. Bishop to e7 and bishop f4 castles queen d3. And this variation is a middle game where black has the bishop pair, but there's a severe structural problem for black, the backward pawn on d6. And black has to show that he can defend, white's very simple idea of, doubling and, wiping this pawn off the board. But if he's able to defend his, his position here, then, he'll have good chances in the endgame because of the bishop pair. So this position is thought to be somewhat better for white, I believe. But yeah, so that is the main the modern main line of the birds. And again, there are other variations in this opening. I mean, black doesn't have to play those moves, white doesn't have to play those moves, but it's an important idea. So let's go back to the Italian game and then this Blackburne-Shilling move. So we'll say white exchanges the knights and then castles. There's a more aggressive way to deal with this, but and that is to play c3 right away. And this is the move that most sources, including Wikipedia, seem to recommend for white as leading to a clear white advantage. And I think it was a King's Crusher video or someone else where they gave this line and then had black playing pawn takes pawn and then knight takes and something like d6, d4, knight f6, castles, and said white is significantly better here. And while that's true, I mean, he's got more center pawns than black. He's got more development, more space. Black is not really putting any pressure on anything right now. And yeah, so if this happened, then I mean, sure, black has a solid position, but white is definitely superior. But that's rather obliging from black's point of view to take on c3. I think d5 is the move to play here. If black wants to keep the theme of disrupting white's development, because really this knight d4 idea, it's all about disrupting. It's occupying a square that is central to white's strategy, and forcing him to develop in an unusual way. So d5 is more consistent with that than taking on c3. And there are several lines here. I've all the lines from this position technically favor white, and if you put these lines into Houdini, you'll give like a plus 0.4 something. But the point is black can create some positions that are difficult to play. For instance, say white were to capture with the pawn. Then I think queen e7 check is best before white is able to castle. So I think Wikipedia suggests king f1 should be the main line here, and white has a significant advantage. But consider the position after bishop d7. This bishop d7 prevents an annoying check from the white bishop, and also prepares queenside castling ASAP. So, say d3 castles, c takes d, king b8. And what do you think of this position? White is up 2 pawns, but he's got the triple isolated pawns, and they can be blockaded fairly easily. By say a bishop on d6, and so after that is done, black has a lot of pieces and pawns on the king side that he can advance and try and attack white's king position here. But it's not clear how white is going to use his material advantage. I mean, he can't really advance the pawns. If he tries to attack on the queen side, well, they're not. There's no weaknesses over there yet. So still there are challenges in terms of how white is going to develop. Also, there's queen e2, and here I think a6 is the best idea. One idea is simply to prevent the check. Another idea is to play b5, bishop b7. For instance, say white takes on d4, and then queen takes, king takes b5, and bishop b3, bishop b7. And here, again, white's up 2 pawns, but this pawn is probably going to be won back shortly after moves like castles, knight f6. And the bishop is potentially quite strong on the long diagonal. And again, all these lines that I'm showing, with the c3, d5 are, objectively better for white, I feel. But they create difficult positions. Like after a4, to clamp down on this b5 move. Black has another idea. Queen takes e2, king takes e2, bishop c5. And now this creates a cubbyhole for the bishop to go back to, so that it cannot be, won by white advancing the pawns. And the bishop is going to hold this d4 square. So say rook e1, bishop f5, king f3 check. Always nice to deliver check with the king. Knight e7, and then this is another type of position that that white would be forced to play. He still hasn't addressed the issue of the queenside pieces. There's also bishop takes d5 here, but I don't think this is very critical, because knight f6 threatening to take on d5, and then also with the idea of if the bishop goes back, knight takes, and coming back to d6 with the knight, e.g. queen e2, queen e7, d3, knight d6, c takes d, queen takes, and knight f5, and this is already looking okay for black. He's only down 1 pawn here, and white has the bad structure. So those are some ideas after the important d5 move here, which is the most fighting idea for black if white tries this aggressive c3 move. But say white castles. This is the move that I recommend, because if black tries d5 in any form, then that only plays into white's hands because he's getting the e-file. So knight f6, and again, knight f6 isn't forced. I mean, black could technically play other moves like c6, d6, g6, knight e7, stuff like this. I guess he could even play h5 there. But in essence, he's playing a tempo-down version of the Bird's Ruy Lopez, because this bishop didn't go to did not go to b5 and then back to c4. The bishop just came to c4 directly. So white is up a tempo here, and the move that the tempo that black is down, the move that he would have ordinarily played in this position but did not, is c6. And this can actually, the lack of c6 in certain situations can actually be advantageous to black. For instance, after knight f6, say rook e1, which is the same as the main line in the other opening, and then d6, c3, knight g4, all these ideas are the same. h3, knight e5, d3, knight takes c4. And suppose white then takes on c4 with the pawn, and then pawn takes, knight takes, bishop e7. And this position, if you compare it to this, black is down the tempo, but he has not played c6, and he doesn't have to play c6. He can leave the pawn on c7, and now the pawn on d6 is not backward. So it takes away one of black's structural problems in that other line, and it leaves a position where black has the bishop pair, and white has more space, but there's no clear targets for him to attack. Maybe white can play for something like knight d5, and then at some point exchange the knight for the bishop, or try to provoke black into advancing the c-pawn and weakening d6. Or he can try some kind of a minority attack with b4 c5 to try to entice a weakness or gain control of the d file. But yeah, this is a possibility that that white has to keep in mind. And another possibility here, because c6 has not been played, there's an additional option for white, and that's queen a4 check. I think this seems like a legit way to play for an advantage for white as well. After bishop d7, queen takes, and then this square is falling, so black pretty much has to take here, and then queen takes. And you'd think the knight would take, but no, it's actually better in this position to play queen takes because it presents black a problem of how to develop his king bishop without dropping g7. And here, compared to the other structure, white has a d and e pawn instead of a c and e pawn, and moves like knight a3, bishop f5, and then later on white can advance the pawn to d4 and have the e4 d4 pawns, and enjoys a pleasant space advantage here. So this is that's another idea for white, to play queen a4 check and then take the knight. But maybe, and again, I think all this stuff has pretty much been seen before, and this Blackburne-Shilling line is, a lot of articles have been written on it, and there's even several YouTube videos, as I've mentioned before. So I was looking for something to contribute to this theory, and it's pretty hard because it's an old opening. But I think instead of moving the rook to e1, what about playing a different version of this queen e2 line? And as far as I can tell, this queen e2 move has never been played before, but it makes sense. White is planning to advance the pawn to e5, which would force the knight to move. Just like the similar line, except remember, black would have a pawn on c6, and he doesn't have one here. So black could play, he could play c6 now, but then e5, knight d5, and then d3, and you'd think this opening would be good for white because he can simply play for space on the king side with moves like f4, maybe queen g4 in some lines, putting pressure on this pawn, and then if that knight retreats, then white can think about occupying e4 with his knight. And at some point, if this knight stays on d5, white could even consider trading the bishop for it and giving black bad structure. But it's not necessary to do that, at this point in the game. So this position is, I can feel pretty confident saying that white would have the advantage here. I mean, he's much more developed than black and has the the space gaining e5 pawn. So so d6, just like in the other line, and then white advances with the critical pawn to e5, and this queen is protected by the bishop, so black can't like throw in queen e7 or anything. So he's got to take this, and then queen takes. Again, bishop e7, rook e1, and this, again, this e-file pressure prevents black from castling. And there's no c6 move in. If the pawn were on c6, then black would play b5, a5, rook a7. This idea. But that's not possible because c6 is not played yet. And if black tries to play c6 now, then it's white's move instead of black's, and white can play b3. And this b3 move is very dangerous because the idea is to play bishop a3, putting pressure on the pinned bishop on e7. And this essentially compels black to play king f8, breaking the pin. There's really nothing better that black can do in this position. So king f8, and then bishop b2, attacking the d-pawn. And if black guards it with c5, white just attacks it head-on with c3. And so white is threatening to win a pawn by taking. And if black takes on c3, then white recaptures with his pawn, and white is just better in every way. So this line, if black plays c6 and goes into a tempo down version of the queen e2 rook e1 idea, then I think he's just worse. But what else is there here? What else does black have to do other than play c6? If he plays king f8, again, that's pretty much admitting his opening is a failure, because his king is going to be stuck in the middle, barring some kind of rook development. And probably in response to king f8, white just plays c3 and tries to clobber the black pawn on d4. There's also queen d6 here, taking advantage of the pawn still being on c7. But after queen takes, pawn takes, black has a bad structure. So yeah, after I think queen e2 instead of rook e1 is quite logical in this position, and I'm not sure what black can do to avoid that line. So this is definitely an idea for the future. If you have an opponent who tries the knight d4, try to go into this, see what happens. So so yeah, that's my attempted contribution to the theory of the Blackburn-Shilling. And I'll talk about this accepted line. I didn't cover after queen g5, bishop takes f7. And this is like a counter-gambit. White intends to sacrifice his knight on e5. Say black plays king e7 here, maintaining contact with the bishop on f7. And also the knight is still hanging, the g2 pawn is still hanging. So white castles here, and black takes on e5, and white takes on g8. This it's not strictly speaking necessary, but I think the capture of the knight on g8 is the best way to maintain white's initiative. Plus, after rook takes, it provides a potentially weak pawn on h7 that white can, target. So c3, attacking the knight, forcing it back. it can go back to c6, but people usually put it on e6. And then d4. So white's previous two moves have been, space-gaining pawn moves, gaining tempo on black's pieces. If black were to take on e4, then white plays d5, attacking the knight on e6. And if the knight moves, then there's rook e1, which wins the black queen. So black has to retreat, and then f4. And we've reached a position where, which Jeremy Silman describes as white's compensation is not in doubt. White has the massive pawn center. The black king is very exposed on e7, and white is already threatening to punch through with moves like, I don't know, f5 followed by e5. And the queenside pieces are very easy for white to develop. After the kingside pawns advance, the bishop can go to f4, g5, and then this knight can come into c4, or maybe into e3 and such. So white has quite an attack and two pawns for his piece here. So really, it takes all the fun out of the Blackburn-Shilling for black. But unfortunately, this isn't forced. In this position, after bishop takes f7, Stefan Bucher in the German magazine Kais Sieber covered the line king d8 here. And this really makes all the theory after king e7 obsolete, because king d8 is a much better move. The king is much safer on d8 than it is on e7, and the tactics work out very well for black. So the bishop is no longer attacked by the king, so white can try knight g4 with the idea of knight e3, just holding the g2 pawn and guarding everything. White would be up 2 pawns in this situation. But unfortunately, there's a very strong move for black here, and that is knight h6, attacking this, and if the knight moves, like if the knight were to capture on h6, then black can take on g2, and as we've seen in previous variations, the attack on the rook on h1 wins with this knight on d4. So c3 is the only move to keep white on the board, hitting this knight. And if the knight goes back, then white can trade on h6. But black has knight c2 check. This is a critical move because it forces the white queen to relinquish the protection of g4. So after queen takes knight, the bishop is hanging, and also this pawn. So bishop c4, queen takes, rook f1, knight g4. Threatens to win the exchange by taking on h2. And in this position, the Bucher covers f3 with, he considers f3 here, which on the surface is a good move. Attacks the knight and provides a square for the rook to go to on f2. But this loses to knight e3 because of the pin on the d2 pawn to white's unprotected queen on c2. So the Houdini preferred best way of giving the exchange is to play d4 instead. And then knight takes h2, bishop e3. And instead of taking right away, it's best to play d5 here. The reason is that the bishop can't take, because the bishop has to guard f1. So e takes is forced, and then knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes. And white has next to no compensation for his exchange here. So yeah, that is why knight g4 does not work in that position. So instead, white must castle. And queen takes c3. I guess knight e6 is also possible, but Bucher has the knight going back to c6 here. And then d4, queen f6. So this hits the bishop. And after, say, bishop takes g8, rook takes e5, there's just queen g6. And with the black king on d8, there isn't nearly enough compensation for the piece here. The white pawns are not really going anywhere, and there's this plan of b6 followed by bishop b7. This is a strong, counteroffensive as well, because it hits the g2 pawn, which could be especially vulnerable if white advances his pawn past f3. And also, this, the queenside fianchetto provides the opportunity for black's king to escape. Go to c8, then go to b8. And later in the game, if necessary, connect his rooks with a6 and king a7. So this idea, again, bishop takes g is not forced, but if the bishop goes back to b3, then knight g e7. And then we've got the same idea, b6, bishop b7, and then bring the king over to the queen side. And I think this pretty much puts the counter-offensive, bishop takes f7, out of business for white. I mean, this position is not, if black knows the correct plan, this position is not very attractive for white. So yeah, unfortunately, I have to report that bishop takes f7 is not a reliable way for white to play against the Blackburne-Shilling Gambit. And after the Wikipedia article gives king d8 as a footnote, claiming that white is slightly better after castles. But I have to disagree with that assessment. I think that white's compensation is not sufficient in the king d8 lines. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about the Blackburne-Shilling Gambit. If you're a beginner to chess openings, or are coaching a beginner to chess openings, then definitely you want to be aware of the trap that occurs after knight takes e5, queen g5, because it's a good example of the concrete triumphing over the abstract. Meaning, yes, black can violate opening principle, but if he knows the specifics of the road that he's driving towards, then it's still possible for the player who plays by rote to lose very quickly. So thank you for watching my video on the Blackburne-Shilling Gambit, and I hope that you have found this information useful. Have a nice day.